Roughly 201 million years ago, Earth entered one of its most extraordinary and transformative ages, the Jurassic period. It was an era that followed the devastating Triassic-Jurassic extinction, a global reset that cleared the ecological slate. From the ashes of that extinction, new life began to rise, slowly at first, then with astonishing speed and diversity. Most people, when they think of the Jurassic, imagine towering dinosaurs and dramatic landscapes, and they're not wrong. This was the age of giants. Sauropods, the long-necked titans of prehistory, began their reign, while armored stegosaurs roamed across fern-covered plains. But the real story of the Jurassic is far richer, deeper, and more surprising than most realize. Beneath the surface details lies a web of facts and discoveries that even many dinosaur enthusiasts may not know. Strange adaptations, forgotten creatures, bizarre climates, and evolutionary paths that led not only to dinosaurs but to birds, marine reptiles, mammals, and even the very continents we live on today. Let's begin with something unexpected. The climate of the Jurassic period wasn't just warm, it was radically different from today in ways that are almost hard to imagine. There were no polar ice caps. Sea levels were much higher. The continents were clumped together in the early stages of breaking apart, meaning vast inland seas stretched across areas that are now completely landlocked. In many parts of the world, lush conifer forests blanketed the land. Cycads, ginkgos and ferns dominated the ground cover. Flowering plants had not yet evolved, that would come later, in the Cretaceous. But what's fascinating is that despite the lack of flowers, pollination had already begun. Early insects like scorpion flies and beetles were experimenting with relationships to gymnosperms, moving pollen between plants long before the first bloom ever opened. That brings us to the next surprising fact. Insects were already highly diverse during the Jurassic. The ancestors of many modern insect orders, flies, beetles, dragonflies, and even early moth-like species, were already buzzing through prehistoric air. Some were massive by today's standards, with wingspans reaching up to 20 centimeters. Fossils from this time show detailed impressions of wings, antennae, and even compound eyes, suggesting that their visual and flight capabilities were already advanced. But insects weren't alone in the skies. The first true birds appeared during the late Jurassic. Everyone knows Archaeopteryx, often called the first bird, with its combination of feathers and teeth, claws and flight. But what most people don't know is that Archaeopteryx was just one of many feathered animals gliding through the Jurassic canopy. Recent fossil discoveries in China, particularly from the Qiaojishan and Daohugo beds, have revealed a broader diversity of feathered dinosaurs and bird-like species than previously thought. Some of these animals had asymmetrical feathers used for flight, while others had elaborate tail plumes that may have played a role in mating displays, similar to peacocks today. And those feathers? They didn't evolve for flight. The earliest feathers were for insulation. Many small theropods, the group of dinosaurs that eventually led to birds, were covered in filamentous hair-like feathers that helped them retain body heat. Only later were feathers adapted for display and flight, a classic example of evolutionary repurposing. Speaking of repurposing, the land wasn't the only place where evolution was experimenting. The oceans of the Jurassic were filled with marine reptiles that had evolved from terrestrial ancestors, adapting in wildly different ways to dominate life beneath the waves. Take ichthyosaurs, for example. These dolphin-shaped reptiles had paddle-like limbs, large eyes for deep-sea vision, and a tail fin for powerful propulsion. Some ichthyosaurs gave birth to live young. Tail first, a detail discovered thanks to fossils of pregnant females preserved in mid-birth. This tail-first birth helped prevent drowning during labor, an elegant solution crafted by evolution. Then there were plesiosaurs, the long-necked marine reptiles with small heads and four flippers. While their locomotion puzzled scientists for years, biomechanical studies now suggest they used all four limbs in synchronized underwater flight, much like modern sea turtles. Their necks, which could be as long as their bodies, were not flexible enough to twist like a snake, but they could arch, dip and pivot, just enough to catch swift, darting prey like fish and squid. And then there's Pliosaurus, the short-necked cousin of the Brachiosaurus. These massive predators had jaws over 2 meters long and bite forces that rivaled the later T-Rex. In the deep waters of the Jurassic seas, plesiosaurs were the apex predators, unmatched in size and power. But perhaps even more surprising is what was happening to mammals during this time. Yes, mammals lived alongside dinosaurs, and not just as tiny, mouse-like creatures hiding in the underbrush. While they were small, usually no larger than modern rats, they were diverse and successful in their own niche. Some were burrowers, others were gliders, capable of leaping from tree to tree with skin flaps stretched between their limbs, like flying squirrels. There were even semi-aquatic species. Fossils like Castorocauda from China show webbed feet and a flattened tail, suggesting an otter-like lifestyle. These early mammals were not primitive. They were warm-blooded, had complex teeth for chewing different foods, and in some cases fur. They simply occupied a different ecological space, avoiding direct competition with the dominant reptiles. Another little-known fact is that the early Jurassic atmosphere had higher oxygen levels than during the Triassic. This increase supported the massive size of some animals and helped fuel the rapid evolution of complex ecosystems. But with that came an increase in fire activity. More oxygen meant more combustion, and charcoal deposits from this time suggest widespread wildfires, especially in drier regions. Those fires were part of a broader climate system, driven not by ice caps or human intervention, but by volcanoes. Massive volcanic events, especially in regions like what is now South America and parts of the North Atlantic, released CO2 into the atmosphere, warming the planet. These eruptions also created the perfect conditions for fossil preservation. Ash fell over lagoons and wetlands, burying plants and animals quickly and sealing them in oxygen-poor environments that allowed for exceptional fossilization. And it's through those fossils that we uncover the craziest facts of all. Like the discovery of dinosaur feathers preserved in amber, not just impressions in stone but actual three-dimensional structures with pigmentation and microstructure intact. Some of these feathers even show colors, such as iridescent sheens or banding patterns, giving us our first real look at the visual world of dinosaurs. Or the recent studies suggesting that some sauropods may have had skin features resembling spines or plates along their backs, not unlike those seen on stegosaurs. While long thought to be smooth-skinned giants, we now suspect sauropods were more variable and complex in their appearance than once imagined. And then there's the mystery of gigantic footprints, larger than any known dinosaur species. These tracks, found in several locations around the world, suggest that either some dinosaurs grew even larger than current fossils indicate, or that we have not yet discovered their skeletal remains. It's a mystery still waiting to be solved. Perhaps the most profound fact of all is that the Jurassic period set the stage for nearly everything that would follow. It was a crucible of experimentation, a time when evolution tried bold, sometimes strange ideas, and more often than not, succeeded. Dinosaurs would go on to dominate for another 80 million years. Birds would evolve from their feathered ancestors and take to the skies. Mammals would bide their time before rising to dominance, and the oceans would transition from pliosaurs and ichthyosaurs to mosasaurs and sharks. But everything that happened after, the flowers, the bees, the grasses, the whales, can trace its roots back to Jurassic soil, forest, reef, and sea. The Jurassic wasn't just a chapter in Earth's history. It was a turning point, a deep breath between extinction and explosion. A time when life looked around, adjusted, and said, let's try something new. And it did. In feathers and fins, teeth and tails, scales and skin, it tried everything. While the Jurassic period is most famously remembered for its dinosaurs, the truth is that it was a world full of strange, often underappreciated life forms, many of which played vital roles in shaping the ecosystems we've come to associate with this ancient age. The closer we look, the more we find evolutionary oddities and ecological phenomena that reveal how truly experimental life on Earth had become during this time. One of the most overlooked stories of the Jurassic is that of the early flying insects, particularly the rise of complex metamorphosis. While many insect groups had already emerged during the Carboniferous and Permian, the Jurassic is when complete metamorphosis, life stages that include larva, pupa, and adult, became more common and more refined. This allowed insects to specialize their life stages, with larvae acting as ground-dwelling grazers or burrowers, and adults focusing on dispersal or reproduction. This strategy meant insects could divide up ecological roles and avoid competition between juveniles and adults of the same species, a game-changing adaptation that helped drive the diversity of beetles, flies, and wasps. And these insects didn't exist in isolation. They were part of a rapidly developing terrestrial food chain, one that involved not just dinosaurs but a wide range of small vertebrates. In fact, one of the most fascinating facts about the Jurassic is how many animals we now associate with later periods were already starting to appear. Consider frogs and salamanders, amphibians that had been evolving since the Devonian. In the Jurassic, they were already relatively modern in form. Fossils from Jurassic lake beds show frogs that could leap and swim with ease, catching insects in ambush just as they do today. Their tiny skeletons are delicate but beautifully preserved specimens from China and Kazakhstan give us a glimpse into how amphibians coexisted with reptiles in humid, fern-filled forests and lakeside ecosystems. One truly bizarre group from this time was the gliding mammals and mammalia forms. These weren't true mammals in the modern sense, but close relatives. Species like Volaticotherium and Myopatagium had broad, membranous skin flaps stretching between their limbs, used to glide between trees, just like flying squirrels today. Their fossils, often found in fine-grained lake deposits, show long limbs, grasping toes, and fur impressions. What makes them especially intriguing is that they likely lived nocturnally, avoiding the daytime hours dominated by dinosaurs. Their teeth show signs of insectivory and possibly even omnivory, meaning they may have eaten both bugs and plant matter. The presence of such advanced behaviors in these small early creatures highlights how life in the shadows of giants was just as complex as life at the top of the food chain. Let's shift focus to something enormous and unexpected: the possible presence of soft tissue display structures in sauropods. For many years, reconstructions of sauropods like Diplodocus or Brachiosaurus depicted them with smooth, uniform skin, but more recent fossil skin impressions have challenged that image. Some skin impressions show hexagonal scale patterns, not unlike those found on modern reptiles. Others show raised knobs and ridges, potentially used for display or thermoregulation. There's even a theory, still speculative, that certain sauropods may have had colorful skin patches or vascularized crests along their spines or necks, used in social signaling or species recognition. The idea that these animals weren't just giants but possibly colorful giants alters the way we picture their presence in ancient landscapes. Imagine a herd of long-necked sauropods, not as dull grey hulks, but as massive, subtly patterned creatures, perhaps with flashes of red or blue along their crests or sides. Color also plays a role in one of the most unexpected findings of recent paleontology: pigment structures in fossilized feathers. Some preserved melanosomes, the pigment-containing organelles in cells, have been found in such good condition that researchers can reconstruct the likely colors of certain Jurassic animals. For instance, Anchiornis, a small feathered dinosaur from the late Jurassic of China, may have had black and white striped wings and a red crown, striking coloration that would have stood out in the dense forests and undergrowth it inhabited. This opens a broader question: how colorful were dinosaurs? Were feathers used solely for insulation and flight, or did they serve social and sexual functions as well, like they do in birds today? These visual signals were likely part of complex behaviors, many of which we're only beginning to theorize. Some theropods show signs of having asymmetrical tail feathers or enlarged claws, features that may have had little to do with survival and everything to do with mating displays, territory defense, or dominance rituals. In fact, one of the more overlooked trends of the Jurassic is the increasing presence of display structures across multiple lineages, not just in theropods, but in stegosaurs, ceratosaurs, and even marine reptiles. Consider the plates of Stegosaurus, not just a defensive adaptation, but possibly also used for display or thermoregulation. Some studies suggest the plates were highly vascularized and may have been capable of color changes through blood flow, much like how some lizards can flush color through their frills today. Let's not forget that sound and scent likely played a huge role in Jurassic ecosystems as well, even if those don't fossilize. Dinosaurs may have used deep vocalizations, low-frequency rumbling, or body posture to communicate across long distances. Marine reptiles may have slapped their flippers or tails. Even small mammals might have chirped, hissed, or clicked to signal one another in the dark. In the oceans, communication took many forms. Fossil belemnite shells sometimes show scars or repaired breaks, possible signs of aggressive interactions, either between rivals or predator attacks. The structure of these shells also suggests a sensitivity to water pressure and movement, features that could have helped them detect the approach of other animals. Now let's talk about one of the most misunderstood facts about the Jurassic. Not all dinosaurs were giants. In fact, many were surprisingly small. For every Allosaurus or Camarasaurus, there were dozens of smaller species, fast-running bipeds like Ornitholestes, Compsognathus, or Frutodons. These animals were often less than a meter in length and likely filled ecological roles similar to foxes or large birds, scavenging, hunting insects and lizards, and avoiding larger predators through speed and agility. The small size of these animals also hints at another curious feature of the Jurassic: insular dwarfism and gigantism. Fossils from island environments, especially in Europe, show species that were smaller or larger than expected, depending on the constraints of their ecosystems. Limited space and resources can drive big animals to evolve into smaller forms, or small animals to become oversized in the absence of predators. Another topic rarely discussed in detail is the role of disease and parasites in the Jurassic. While we don't find viruses or bacteria in the fossil record, we do see evidence of infection and healing. Dinosaur bones with abnormal growths, fused joints, or healed fractures suggest they suffered and survived injuries, diseases, or even attacks. Coprolites, fossilized dung, sometimes contain parasitic worms, pointing to the internal challenges these animals faced alongside the external ones. Even trace fossils like bite marks, footprints, and nests give insight into daily life, social behavior, and stress. Footprints laid over others may indicate migration or herd activity. Nesting sites with crushed eggshells suggest communal breeding grounds, where multiple animals laid their eggs close together, increasing survival odds for some while exposing others to predation or trampling. And speaking of eggs, one of the most unexpected discoveries is that dinosaur eggs came in a wide variety of shapes and textures. Some were hard-shelled, like those of birds. Others were soft and leathery, like those of many reptiles. In some species, the eggs were elongated. In others, perfectly spherical. The diversity of egg forms suggests differing nesting strategies. Some buried them, others brooded them, and some may have even returned to the same nesting sites year after year. This diversity reveals a complex reproductive world. Some dinosaurs may have exhibited parental care, guarding nests, helping hatchlings, or staying near juveniles during their vulnerable early stages. This wouldn't be surprising considering that modern birds and crocodilians, both dinosaur relatives, often show remarkable levels of care for their young. In the end, the Jurassic wasn't a static world. It was a dynamic, layered, and sometimes unpredictable stage where nature tried countless variations in form, function, and behavior. And every fossil we uncover today is a snapshot of that trial and error process, capturing a moment in the vast story of life on Earth. Some of those moments are bizarre, some are breathtaking, and many are still waiting to be found. As the Jurassic world continued to evolve, it wasn't only the animals and plants that were changing, it was the very land beneath their feet. What many people don't realize is that the Jurassic was a period of profound geological transformation. Mountains rose, continents shifted, and entire ecosystems vanished or emerged, all thanks to the slow but unstoppable force of plate tectonics. Let's begin with the continents themselves. During the early Jurassic, much of Earth's landmass was still united in the supercontinent Pangaea, but it was already beginning to split into two massive halves, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. This division wasn't clean or sudden. It happened gradually over millions of years. But as it occurred, it began to reshape ocean currents, create new coastlines, and isolate populations of plants and animals in ways that would have long-lasting effects. These geographic barriers meant that species evolving in one region wouldn't necessarily spread to another. Over time, this led to regional endemism, where certain animals were only found in specific parts of the world. For example, while stegosaurs were widespread across parts of Europe and North America, some of the largest sauropods like Giraffatitan were found in what is now Tanzania, and their body proportions and skull shapes were distinct from their northern relatives. This separation also influenced marine life. New seaways opened between rifting continents, filling with shallow, warm water that was ideal for reef-building organisms and marine reptiles. As these basins deepened, they also became excellent fossil traps, places where sediment quickly buried dead organisms, creating the fine preservation we rely on today to understand Jurassic ecosystems. One particularly rich marine deposit is the Oxford Clay Formation in England, a layer of mudstone packed with the remains of marine reptiles, ammonites, and even the occasional terrestrial dinosaur or pterosaur swept out to sea. These fossils tell us about the coastal and nearshore environments of Europe during the Middle to Late Jurassic, a world where plesiosaurs swam among shoals of fish and seabirds skimmed the waves overhead. But perhaps the strangest and least expected feature of the Jurassic world was the way some environments reversed themselves over time. Areas that were once dry deserts during the Triassic became lush river valleys or coastal wetlands in the Jurassic, and places that had been underwater were lifted above sea level by tectonic forces, exposing marine rocks to erosion and reshaping local climates. In some fossil sites, We even find fossilized forests buried beneath marine sediments, evidence of ancient coastlines that were abruptly drowned by rising sea levels. These moments of transition, captured in rock, are like bookmarks in Earth's story. They remind us that change was not only constant, it was often sudden and sometimes catastrophic. But what about life during these changes? One strange and often overlooked adaptation among certain dinosaurs was the development of pneumatic bones, bones that were hollow and filled with air sacs, similar to what we see in modern birds. These structures helped reduce body weight, making it easier for large animals to grow to enormous sizes, or, in the case of flying species, to stay airborne. Pneumatic bones weren't limited to birds or even their closest relatives. Some sauropods, like Camarasaurus, also had air sacs running through their vertebrae. These structures weren't just for lightening the skeleton. They may have also been part of a complex respiratory system that allowed for more efficient oxygen exchange, similar to the airflow system in birds. This might have been essential for sustaining such massive animals in warm, oxygen-rich environments. It's another reminder that dinosaurs were not sluggish, cold-blooded beasts. They were metabolically active, possibly warm-blooded in many cases, and finely tuned to their environments. And their physiology was often far more advanced than earlier paleontologists had assumed. Let's also look at something you won't often see in documentaries: the evolution of dinosaur brains during the Jurassic. While earlier Triassic dinosaurs had relatively simple brain structures, the Jurassic period saw the emergence of greater variation in brain size and shape, especially among theropods and early birds. Fossilized brain cases, examined using CT scanning, reveal expansions in areas associated with balance, coordination, and even vision. Archaeopteryx, for example, had a brain shape that was intermediate between non-avian theropods and modern birds. Its inner ear structure suggests it had excellent spatial awareness and balance, important traits for an animal navigating through trees or gliding in open air. Meanwhile, theropods like Allosaurus show enlarged olfactory bulbs, suggesting a powerful sense of smell. This may have helped them locate prey over long distances or detect carrion. Coupled with forward-facing eyes and depth perception, it made them formidable hunters, as intelligent as they were physically dangerous. In contrast, sauropods had relatively small brains, especially when compared to their massive body sizes. But that doesn't mean they were unintelligent, just that their brains were wired for different needs. Their sensory and motor systems were likely distributed throughout their bodies, especially along their long necks and tails. There's even evidence that a secondary nerve center near the base of the spine may have helped control reflexes in the tail and legs. Another bizarre Jurassic feature: some dinosaurs may have had beaks, not just in the sense of sharp-edged mouths, but actual keratin-covered structures used for cropping vegetation. Fossils of small ornithischians like Heterodontosaurus and Lesothosaurus show early signs of beak development, complete with ridged premaxillary bones that likely anchored tough keratin sheaths. These proto-beaks help them nip off ferns, seed ferns or horsetails, plants common in the Jurassic flora. Over time, beak structures would evolve further in many herbivorous dinosaurs, leading to the broad, duckbill-shaped jaws seen in hadrosaurs of the Cretaceous. And let's not forget about plants themselves. While there were no flowers yet, the Jurassic was a time of explosive growth for gymnosperms, cone-bearing plants like conifers, ginkgos, and cycads. These trees dominated the landscape and formed the primary vegetation base for large herbivores. In fact, the digestive strategies of many Jurassic herbivores were closely tied to their food sources. Unlike mammals, they didn't chew their food much. Instead, they likely relied on fermentation chambers in their guts, where bacteria helped break down tough plant fibers. This process would have produced large amounts of gas, something that, in a herd of 20-ton sauropods, could have had atmospheric consequences. One study even suggested that sauropod flatulence might have released enough methane to affect global climate. A humorous yet plausible hypothesis grounded in biology and chemistry. Meanwhile, the smaller herbivores like early stegosaurs or heterodontosaurids may have used gastroliths, swallowed stones, to help grind plant material in their stomachs, much like birds and crocodilians do today. Fossils from several Jurassic species include smooth, rounded pebbles found in the abdominal region, likely used for this very purpose. Insects during this time also played vital ecological roles that are often ignored. We tend to focus on predation or pollination, but many Jurassic insects were decomposers, breaking down dead plant material and returning nutrients to the soil. Termite-like insects may have begun building colonies, and beetles were already specializing in decaying wood, helping recycle forest ecosystems in much the same way they do today. Even fungi left their mark. Though soft and rarely fossilized, traces of fungal activity have been found in petrified wood and leaf fossils from the Jurassic. This suggests a complex, unseen world of nutrient cycling, mutualism with plants, and possibly even competition with bacteria, an entire ecosystem of organisms that rarely leave behind physical remains, but played critical roles in ecosystem function. As the Jurassic drew closer to its end, these systems, land, ocean, forest, and air, had all grown more interconnected. The animals were more diverse, the food webs more layered, and the evolutionary stakes higher than ever. And all of this happened in a world before flowers, before grass, before bees, and before the great extinction events that would shape the next stages of life. This was the Jurassic, stranger, smarter, and more colorful than most ever imagined. By the time the Jurassic reached its midpoint, the Earth was fully immersed in a time of bold biological experimentation. Evolution wasn't just creating dinosaurs, it was crafting an entire supporting cast of animals, plants, and environmental systems that would define the rest of the Mesozoic era. The more closely we study this period, the clearer it becomes that the Jurassic was a time of innovation across every ecosystem, from forest floors to ocean trenches. Let's begin with something that might sound small, but had a massive impact: the rise of complex ecosystems within freshwater environments. While we tend to focus on terrestrial and marine life during the Jurassic, river deltas, lakes and wetlands also played a vital role in supporting biodiversity. These zones were filled with fish, amphibians, early crocodiliforms, turtles, insects and plants, adapted to fluctuating water levels. In fact, some of the best preserved fossils from the Jurassic come from lacustrine deposits, sediments that settled at the bottom of ancient lakes. These fine-grained beds preserved incredible details, including soft tissues, delicate fins, and even patterns on feathers and wings. Famous fossil sites like Solnhofen in Germany and the Daohugo beds in China were once shallow lagoons or lakes, and they've revealed entire communities of animals frozen in time. Many of the animals found in these sites were transitionary forms, creatures that don't neatly fit into one category. Take the gliding mammalia forms from China. They weren't true mammals yet, but they had hair, were warm-blooded, and had molar teeth capable of shearing and grinding. Some had membranes stretched between their limbs for gliding, showing that arboreal life had already begun evolving sophisticated locomotion strategies. Insects from these environments also hint at unexpected complexity. Fossils of giant lacewings with wingspans up to 15 centimeters reveal patterns and structures that indicate camouflage and perhaps mimicry. Some species may have used eye spots or false antennae to confuse predators, strategies we associate with butterflies and moths today. These behavioral tricks were already being explored in a world dominated by reptiles. And while we're on the subject of behavioral complexity, let's talk about brooding and nesting behaviors. Long before modern birds sat on their eggs, some theropods were already experimenting with forms of parental care. Fossilized nesting sites from the Jurassic show circular arrangements of eggs, often with signs that the adult remained close by. In some cases, adult dinosaur fossils have been found over or beside these nests, leading scientists to believe that brooding behavior may have evolved earlier than we thought. These early caretaking strategies suggest that at least some dinosaurs were more than just egg layers. They were parents, perhaps even protectors of their young. This brings us to the fascinating world of eggshell diversity in the Jurassic. Not all dinosaur eggs were hard and brittle. Some, especially those laid by smaller theropods and basal ornithischians, had soft or leathery shells, similar to those of many modern reptiles. These eggs may have been buried rather than exposed in open nests, helping them retain moisture and avoid predation. What's especially surprising is that the microstructure of eggshells tells us about more than just the species that laid them. It also tells us about the environment. The pore size, thickness and composition of eggshells change based on humidity, oxygen levels, and even temperature. By studying eggshell fossils, paleontologists can reconstruct the climate and nesting conditions of the time, a subtle but powerful tool in paleoecology. And speaking of subtle clues, some of the strangest and most fascinating discoveries from the Jurassic come not from skeletons but from trace fossils, footprints, burrows and bite marks that hint at interactions, behaviors, and entire species we may not even have body fossils for. Jurassic trackways found in Portugal, Morocco and the western United States show herd behavior among sauropods, parallel tracks of multiple individuals moving in the same direction, often across mudflats or riverbeds. The spacing of the footprints suggests that young animals traveled alongside adults, a potential indicator of social structure. Some tracks even show tail drag marks, giving us insight into how these animals moved and behaved. Elsewhere, predator-prey interactions have been preserved in the most unexpected ways. Fossil bones of herbivorous dinosaurs sometimes show healed bite marks, evidence of a failed predation attempt and the prey's survival. In other cases, we find clusters of teeth from theropods embedded in bones, indicating violent attacks, scavenging, or even pack hunting. There's also evidence of dinosaur cannibalism, although it's still debated. In some fossil bone beds, teeth and bite marks from the same species have been found on juvenile bones. Whether this represents opportunistic scavenging or active predation on the young remains uncertain, but it reminds us that Jurassic ecosystems were competitive, dangerous, and complex. Now let's shift to something that feels both familiar and alien: volcanism and its impact on life. During the Jurassic, volcanism was not just a background process, it was a dominant geological force that shaped entire regions. Massive volcanic provinces like the Karoo-Ferrar in southern Gondwana and what would later become parts of Antarctica were erupting in pulses, releasing gases, ash and lava across vast landscapes. These eruptions had both destructive and constructive effects. On one hand, they buried forests, reshaped coastlines, and created temporary climate disruptions through the release of sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide. On the other hand, they also enriched soils, created new landforms, and laid down fertile ash beds that supported diverse ecosystems once they cooled. In marine settings, volcanic activity contributed to the creation of hydrothermal vent systems, where mineral-rich water flowed from seafloor cracks and fed chemosynthetic communities, just as it does today. While evidence for Jurassic hydrothermal vent ecosystems is limited, mineral deposits and trace fossils suggest they may have existed, supporting life forms entirely separate from the photosynthetic web. And that brings us to one of the strangest facts of all. Not all life in the Jurassic depended on sunlight. Deep-sea organisms, chemosynthetic bacteria, and scavengers feeding on sunken carcasses operated in total darkness, relying instead on chemical energy. These communities existed outside the influence of surface ecosystems and may have been incredibly ancient, survivors of previous extinction events and evolutionary holdovers from Earth's earliest oceans. Another overlooked aspect of Jurassic life is the rapid evolution of sensory adaptations, especially among small reptiles and fish. The structure of semicircular canals in the inner ears of some small theropods suggests agile, quick-reacting movement, evidence that these animals relied on fast visual processing and precise motor control. Their eyes, often forward-facing, would have given them good depth perception and the ability to track moving prey. Some early fish, meanwhile, show signs of electroreception, the ability to detect electrical fields generated by the muscles and nerves of other animals. This adaptation is common in some modern fish like sharks and rays, and its origins may stretch back further than we imagined. In the oceans, the structure of ammonite eyes continues to fascinate researchers. Unlike modern cephalopods, which have soft, camera-like eyes with lenses and irises, ammonites had rigid eye capsules, suggesting a very different visual system, possibly adapted for life in murky or low-light environments. Their eyes may not have been mobile like ours, but rather wide-angle and light-sensitive, allowing them to detect movement and shapes rather than focus in detail. And then there's the truly strange, the possibility of thermoregulatory sails or humps in some Jurassic dinosaurs. While most often associated with later creatures like Spinosaurus, evidence from some Middle Jurassic species hints at the presence of elongated neural spines along the back, which may have supported sails or fatty humps used for energy storage or temperature regulation. The exact purpose of these features remains debated, but their existence points to a greater variety in dinosaur body plans than once thought. Finally, one of the craziest realizations about the Jurassic is just how much we still don't know. For every major fossil site that has been excavated, there are dozens more lying untouched, buried beneath modern cities, forests, or oceans. Entire groups of animals, early birds, gliding reptiles, aquatic amphibians, are likely missing from our current picture. The fossil record is both a gift and a gap. It shows us what was and reminds us of what we've yet to find. Each new discovery rewrites some part of the story. Each new bone or feather impression shifts our understanding just a bit further from the simple narrative of dinosaurs ruled to something deeper, a living, breathing world filled with layers of complexity, behavior, and wonder. And while the Jurassic ended some 145 million years ago, its legacy lives on, in birdsong, in flowering plants, in insects that glow, in reptiles that bask in the sun, in the rhythms of the sea. It was an age of giants, yes, but also of whispers, subtleties, and secrets still waiting to be uncovered. By the midpoint of the Jurassic, Earth had become a planet of thriving complexity. The land, the air, and the seas each told a different chapter of life's unfolding story, and yet they were all intimately connected. Dinosaurs may have dominated the land, and marine reptiles ruled the seas, but what often goes unnoticed is how the boundaries between these worlds were porous. Ecosystems overlapped. Habitats shifted, and certain groups of animals were beginning to evolve strategies to bridge the gap between two worlds. One such group was the pterosaurs, flying reptiles often mistaken for dinosaurs, but distinct in their lineage. While the earliest pterosaurs had already appeared in the late Triassic, the Jurassic was when they diversified, adapted, and took over the skies in earnest. And what's rarely appreciated is just how diverse they became. Some were small, with wingspans no bigger than a crow's. Others stretched over 10 feet across. They weren't just passive gliders. Their bone structure, muscle attachments, and fossilized soft tissue impressions suggest that many pterosaurs were strong flyers, capable of powered flight, dynamic gliding, and even vertical takeoff. These animals weren't just surviving, they were engineering solutions for life in the air. What's especially surprising is that pterosaurs came in an incredible variety of forms. Some had long, tooth-filled beaks designed to snatch fish from the water. Others had short, stubby faces for crushing hard prey, perhaps crabs or shelled invertebrates. Some, like Pterorhynchus, had crests made of soft tissue that may have changed color or inflated, possibly for display, communication, or thermoregulation. Soft tissue preservation from places like the Solnhofen limestone has revealed wing membranes complete with muscle fibers and blood vessels, suggesting a highly advanced flying structure. In some specimens, fibers known as actinofibrils run through the wings, offering support and flexibility. These details paint a picture of animals far more adapted for precision flight than earlier artists had ever imagined. And some pterosaurs didn't just fly, they waded or stalked prey along coastlines. Their long legs, webbed feet, and beak shapes suggest behaviors more in line with herons, skimmers, or sandpipers. In fact, fossilized trackways show that some pterosaurs walked quadrupedally on land, with front limbs that supported their folded wings, a trait unique among flying animals, and a clever use of anatomy. As these flying reptiles flourished in the sky, another quiet revolution was taking place on land, the expansion of ecosystems built around gymnosperms. These cone-bearing plants, cycads, ginkgos, araucaria pines, were everywhere. In some areas, forests were dominated by species that now only survive in isolated pockets of the modern world. The Wollemi pine, discovered in Australia in the 1990s, is considered a living fossil and closely resembles Jurassic conifers. These gymnosperms weren't just backdrop. They were primary producers, the base of the food web for enormous herbivores like stegosaurs and sauropods. Their structure also shaped the ecosystem itself. Dense groves of ginkgos would have created shady, open understories. Spiny cycads filled open plains, resisting the grazing mouths of dinosaurs. Their tough, waxy leaves required specialized digestive systems or long fermentation periods to extract nutrients. This is where gastroliths come into play again. Sauropods, those long-necked giants like Diplodocus and Apatosaurus, would swallow stones that helped grind tough plant material in their massive guts. These stones, worn smooth over time, are found alongside fossilized skeletons and give insight into the inner biology of the largest land animals to ever live. And while it's tempting to imagine these sauropods as slow-moving tanks, biomechanical models suggest they were surprisingly agile for their size. Their column-like legs could support immense weight while still allowing steady locomotion. Their long necks, supported by a system of air sacs and vertebral ligaments, let them graze over wide areas without needing to move their entire body. In fact, some sauropods may have held their necks nearly horizontal, sweeping through low vegetation like natural lawnmowers. Others, like Brachiosaurus with its longer forelimbs, could raise its head high to feed from tall trees, partitioning resources vertically in the environment and reducing competition. These giants didn't live alone. Fossil sites often reveal multi-species dinosaur communities, where small ornithopods, armored dinosaurs, and predators all shared the same habitat. Each played a different role in the ecosystem. Stegosaurs, for instance, likely served as low-browsing specialists, using their beaked mouths to clip ferns and horsetails near the ground. Their iconic plates and tail spikes, called thagomizers, weren't just for show. Blood vessel impressions in the plates suggest they may have flushed with color, used either for thermoregulation or visual display. The tail spikes, on the other hand, were clearly defensive weapons. Fossilized tail vertebrae from predators show puncture wounds that match the spacing and size of stegosaur spikes. Predators had to be careful and clever. Large theropods like Allosaurus were apex predators of their time, but their role in the food web wasn't as dominant as one might assume. They likely relied on ambush, using forest cover or surprise attacks, rather than sheer speed. Their skulls were relatively light, with strong neck muscles and jaws that functioned more like hooks than bone crushers. They'd bite, tear, and retreat, letting blood loss or fatigue bring down their prey. There's even evidence that these predators may have practiced intraspecific combat. Bite marks found on Allosaurus skulls match the shape of other Allosaurus teeth, suggesting face-biting behavior either from territorial disputes or mating competition. These were complex animals, operating in social and behavioral frameworks more nuanced than simply hunting and feeding. And like the pterosaurs above them and the mammals below, these dinosaurs were products of selective pressure, competition, and environmental change. Their survival wasn't guaranteed, and the fossil record includes plenty of failed branches, species that vanished just as quickly as they appeared. Some of these species only exist today in fragmentary form, a jawbone here, a partial limb there. But each piece is a puzzle, a story of an animal that once lived, moved, and contributed to the Jurassic world. In the oceans, change was coming too. Ichthyosaurs, while still abundant, were beginning to decline in diversity. New marine predators, short-necked plesiosaurs, and emerging crocodilian forms were beginning to take over top predator roles. The competition was heating up below the surface, just as it was on land. One of the most surprising discoveries in marine fossils is the presence of healed injuries, especially in creatures like plesiosaurs and turtles. Bones show fractures that fused, ribs that rejoined after being snapped, and jaws that healed asymmetrically. These records of survival paint a vivid picture of daily life, not just of predator and prey, but of resilience, adaptation, and recovery. They also tell us that prehistoric life wasn't constant battle. It was also rest, growth, social interaction, and perhaps even play or curiosity. The diversity of body forms, senses, and behaviors that we see hints at lives as rich and varied as those of modern animals. Even in their last moments, many Jurassic animals left behind subtle clues about how they lived. The posture of some fossil skeletons with arched necks or curled limbs has led scientists to develop theories about causes of death, such as neurological damage, drowning, or sudden exposure to volcanic gases. Some were buried by flash floods, others by volcanic ash, still others by anoxic events in shallow seas that stilled the water and preserved their forms in perfect detail. Through all of this, the Earth kept spinning, climate shifted, oceans moved, and evolution marched forward. The Jurassic wasn't just a time of dinosaurs, it was a time of innovation, complexity, and delicate balance, a world constantly refining the rules of life. From flying reptiles with elaborate crests to gliding mammals that lived in the forest canopy, from armored giants with tail weapons to sea creatures with sonar-like eyes, from soft-bodied insects with patterned wings to towering conifers that shaded ancient valleys, every species, every adaptation, every footprint and feather told part of a much larger story. A story still unfolding with every fossil we find. As the Jurassic period rolled forward, it became clear that Earth was in the middle of one of the greatest biological expansions in its history. Every corner of the planet, from the highest forest canopy to the darkest ocean trench, was being filled not just by life, but by increasingly specialized and sophisticated life. And while the spotlight often shines on towering dinosaurs or swooping pterosaurs, there's a world of equally fascinating life forms that made the Jurassic into a genuinely strange and remarkable time, especially if you look closer. One group worth revisiting is the early turtles, or more specifically, the marine turtles that had already adapted to life in the open sea by the middle of the Jurassic. The many are surprised to learn that turtles were not only present during this era, but thriving. Species like Plesioches and Hydropelta swam along the coastlines of what is now Europe, using powerful limbs that had already transformed into broad paddles. Their shells were flatter than those of most modern land turtles, streamlined for movement in water. They fed on soft invertebrates, small fish, and likely carrion, using strong jaws to crush and chew their prey. What makes these early turtles fascinating isn't just that they existed, it's that they had already solved many of the problems of marine life that we associate with their modern counterparts, navigating open water, regulating buoyancy, and breathing efficiently while surfacing quickly. These weren't clumsy transitional animals. They were already specialists. In fact, the ability of turtles to evolve in such distinct directions, from desert dwellers to deep divers, may have its roots right here in the Jurassic. And turtles weren't alone in their evolutionary versatility. Across the globe, reptiles were testing the limits of form and function. One example of this is Thalattosuchia, a group of fully aquatic crocodile-like reptiles that had completely embraced ocean life. Some looked like a mix between a crocodile and a dolphin, long snouts, streamlined bodies and tails built for propulsion. Among them, Metriorhynchus stood out. Unlike modern crocodiles, it had lost the heavy osteoderms that weigh down most crocodilians. Instead, it had evolved sleek, smooth skin and fins, becoming a true marine predator. Its limbs had become flippers. It even had salt glands to handle drinking seawater, a trait modern sea turtles and marine iguanas also possess. It's a startling reminder that convergent evolution, where unrelated animals evolve similar traits, was already well underway. Marine reptiles were independently hitting upon the same solutions to aquatic life, whether they came from lizards, crocodiles, or even terrestrial dinosaurs. But for every streamlined predator, there were also the bizarre forms, animals that seem more like nature's experiments than final products. One of the most curious among them is Therizinosaurus's early relatives, long-clawed, feathered theropods that didn't look or behave like their carnivorous cousins. While Therizinosaurus itself appeared much later, Jurassic relatives such as Brachiosaurus hinted at an evolutionary path that would eventually abandon hunting for a life of herbivory or omnivory. Their claws, rather than weapons, may have been used to pull down branches or strip leaves from trees. Their bodies were stocky with small heads and long arms, proportions that stood in stark contrast to the sleek predators of the time. It's important to remember that not all theropods were meat-eaters. The group that includes T-Rex and Velociraptor also includes birds, and along the way, multiple lineages experimented with plant-eating diets, perhaps as a way to avoid competition or exploit new food sources. In fact, diet flexibility is one of the key themes of the Jurassic. With ecosystems growing more diverse, animals had to either specialize or diversify to stay competitive. That includes mammals, which were rapidly diversifying, not in size but in ecological strategy. Many Jurassic mammals were nocturnal, warm-blooded, and covered in fur. But they weren't all the same. Some were diggers, others were climbers, and some, as recent fossils show, were even aquatic. Castorocauda, a Jurassic mammal-like animal found in China, had webbed feet and a paddle-like tail, much like an otter. It fed on fish and aquatic invertebrates, and its fur was so well preserved in the fossil that individual hair strands are visible. This wasn't a primitive mammal, it was a highly adapted semi-aquatic hunter, thriving in an ecological niche that most people wouldn't expect existed 160 million years ago. And even stranger are the multituberculates, small mammals with rodent-like teeth that seem to have been everywhere. With their ever-growing molars, burrowing limbs and long tails, they were the Jurassic equivalent of rodents, and they survived for more than 100 million years, long past the end of the dinosaurs. Let's shift for a moment to something that didn't evolve, but persisted: horsetails and ferns. These ancient plants were widespread during the Jurassic, covering entire riverbanks, forest floors, and even mountain slopes. Horsetails in particular could grow to several meters tall, forming dense bamboo-like thickets that provided shelter and food for small herbivores. These plants had spore-based reproduction, unlike the flowering plants that would evolve later. They didn't need pollinators. They released spores into the wind, relying on chance and moisture. But despite their simplicity, they were survivors. In many areas, they dominated, outcompeting even conifers in wetter regions. In fact, entire fossilized fern prairies have been found beneath volcanic ash beds from Jurassic eruptions, their stems and fronds preserved in upright positions, frozen in place by the sudden rain of ash. These moments of geological violence created natural time capsules, and they remind us that even in stability, nature was never far from change. That brings us to another overlooked yet incredible detail: paleosols, ancient soil layers that preserve chemical signatures of the environment. By analyzing these fossilized soils, scientists can learn about rainfall patterns, atmospheric CO2 levels, and even the types of plants that grew in a given area. And what they're finding from the Jurassic is remarkable. The CO2 levels during this period were up to 5 times higher than modern levels, contributing to a warm, ice-free world with high humidity and intense greenhouse conditions. But the world wasn't just hot, it was also seasonal. Some areas had wet and dry periods. Others experienced monsoonal rains that would flood plains and fill temporary lakes. These seasonal pulses left behind alternating sediment layers, complete with ripple marks, mud cracks, and fossilized footprints of animals that walked across them while they were still soft. By reading these subtle geological signals, we can almost reconstruct a year in the life of a Jurassic landscape. You might see a dry season when water evaporated, leaving behind cracked mud and tracks of thirsty animals. Then a sudden flood, bringing sediment, debris, and a new layer of life. Then another dry spell, and so on. These rhythms are recorded layer by layer in rocks we now walk across, often without realizing the ancient drama hidden just beneath our feet. And if all of that isn't strange enough, consider this: some of the Jurassic's strangest creatures didn't fossilize well at all. Jellyfish, soft-bodied worms, squid-like cephalopods with no hard parts. Many of these organisms are nearly invisible in the fossil record. But in the rare cases where they are preserved, like in the exceptional Lagerstätten sites, they reveal creatures that seem alien, animals with no bones, strange radial symmetry, and bioluminescent organs. These were part of the same ecosystem as the plesiosaurs and ammonites. They were prey, predators, and recyclers, often forming the base of the oceanic food web. Their fleeting, ghost-like presence in the fossil record reminds us that we've only uncovered part of the full Jurassic world. And that world, incomplete as it may seem, continues to shape the Earth around us. The chalky cliffs of southern England. They started as seafloor sediments in the late Jurassic and Cretaceous. The coal beds of China and Mongolia, built from Jurassic forests that were buried and compacted over millions of years. Even the oxygen we breathe, some of it was generated by marine algae and coastal plants that thrived in the Jurassic sun. In a very real sense, we walk on the ashes and bones of the Jurassic, even today. And as paleontologists continue to dig, scan and analyze, new facts continue to emerge, each one stranger and more enlightening than the last. Each discovery pulls us deeper into a world where the familiar rules of life still applied, but everything looked just a little different. It was a world of giants and gliders, of steaming forests and deep oceans, of resilience and transformation. It was the Jurassic. As the Jurassic period progressed toward its later stages, the world was now thoroughly defined by its thriving biodiversity, widespread tectonic change, and evolutionary experimentation. Life didn't merely fill environments, it transformed them. Ecosystems had become increasingly layered and interconnected, and with that came behaviors and adaptations that still astonish scientists today. One of the more underappreciated aspects of the Jurassic world was how intensely dynamic predator-prey relationships had become, not just on land but in the sea and air as well. Many creatures had evolved highly refined survival strategies that went far beyond teeth and claws. For instance, fossil trackways have revealed evidence of evasion behavior in prey species. Small herbivorous dinosaurs like Scutellosaurus left zigzagging patterns in soft sediment, suggesting quick direction changes likely to escape predators. Their light build, long tails, and relatively short limbs hint at animals built for maneuverability more than speed. These weren't just passive grazers, they were alert, reactive, and possibly even social. In contrast, large predators like Allosaurus or Ceratosaurus left more direct, determined tracks, straight lines, wider gaits, deeper impressions from weight. The contrast between the two offers more than just anatomy. It paints a picture of interaction, of one animal stalking another, even if only recorded in fossilized footprints. And speaking of Ceratosaurus, here's something crazy you may not know. This mid-sized predator had a distinctive horn on its snout, the purpose of which is still debated. It may have been used for combat, visual signaling, or even mate attraction. But what's most interesting is that this horn was not reinforced for impacts, meaning if it was used in combat, it likely wasn't for high-force collisions like you'd expect in headbutting. Instead, it may have functioned more like an ornament, display over function. That kind of sexual selection was likely common across many Jurassic species, though we're only beginning to understand how it may have driven evolutionary paths. Now, let's pivot to a part of the ecosystem that is often completely forgotten in pop culture: the decomposers. During the Jurassic, scavengers were absolutely essential to keeping ecosystems in balance. Large carcasses, like those of sauropods or marine reptiles, would have attracted a whole succession of animals, from opportunistic carnivores to insects to bacteria and fungi. One overlooked group that played a key role here were small crocodiliforms, many of which weren't apex predators but more generalized feeders. Some species had blunter teeth, suggesting they crushed bones or scavenged soft tissues left behind by larger predators. These animals likely filled ecological niches similar to jackals, vultures, or even raccoons, scavenging, foraging, and occasionally preying on smaller, slower animals. Fossil evidence of tooth marks and coprolites, fossilized dung, even suggests a complex digestive ecosystem. In some deposits, coprolites contain crushed bone, scales, and bits of invertebrate shell, an entire meal broken down and reassembled into geological time. These clues let scientists reconstruct not just diet but trophic levels, what animals ate whom and how nutrients flowed through the Jurassic environment. Another group deeply tied to the nutrient cycle were the fungi, particularly those involved in wood decay. While rarely preserved, fungal borings have been identified in fossilized logs, showing how these organisms slowly decomposed dead plant matter. Their actions helped recycle carbon and nitrogen, supporting soil health and allowing plant ecosystems to thrive. And plants themselves were changing. While the Jurassic was still dominated by gymnosperms, including conifers, cycads, and ginkgos, evolutionary experiments were underway that hinted at future shifts. Some Jurassic plants had begun to show early versions of reproductive specializations, structures designed to protect seeds, adapt to wind dispersion, or, in rare cases, interact with insects. Yes, even without flowers, plants were beginning to form relationships with insects. Certain beetles and flies may have acted as pollen carriers for gymnosperms, moving from cone to cone as they fed. While not pollinators in the modern sense, these early interactions laid the groundwork for what would become the flowering plant-insect explosion in the Cretaceous. This slow transformation extended to the physical environment as well. Forests influenced climate and erosion, shaping rivers, floodplains, and soil formation. Fallen logs created microhabitats. Dense canopies regulated light and temperature. Every tree was a living system, a home for insects, early mammals, and small reptiles, some of which glided from branch to branch, avoiding danger below. One fascinating example is the small Jurassic reptile shanglong, a glider that used a membrane supported by elongated ribs, very different from the bat-like wings of pterosaurs or the feathered arms of early birds. This creature likely lived in forest canopies, feeding on insects and small plants, launching itself through the air to escape predators or reach new feeding areas. And that leads us naturally into the sky. The evolution of flight was not a single step, but a complex, multi-lineage phenomenon. We often focus on pterosaurs and birds, but both groups evolved flight independently, and their solutions to flight were surprisingly different. Pterosaurs used a wing supported by a single elongated finger, with membranes stretching between their limbs and body. Their bones were hollow, their musculature specialized, and their sensory systems finely tuned for aerial control. Some had pycnofibers, hair-like filaments, that may have helped with insulation or streamlining. Birds, on the other hand, evolved from small theropod dinosaurs with feathers originally used for insulation or display. Over time, these feathers became asymmetrical and adapted for gliding, then flapping flight. Fossils like Archaeopteryx and Anchiornis show a fascinating combination of features, long tails, claws on the wings, and feather arrangements that were aerodynamic but not yet fully modern. It's also worth noting that early birds likely climbed trees and launched into flight from elevated positions, not unlike modern chicks learning to fly by jumping from branches. This trees-down model of flight origin suggests that the forest canopy was as much a laboratory for flight evolution as open ground was. Speaking of movement, let's explore a peculiar overlooked aspect of Jurassic life: migration. While hard to prove, there's growing evidence that certain dinosaur species may have followed seasonal migration patterns, much like modern caribou or wildebeest. Sauropod trackways extending for dozens of kilometers hint at long-distance travel, possibly in search of food, water, or nesting grounds. Some fossil sites show repeated layering of nests, suggesting that certain areas were used year after year for reproduction. The eggs are laid in the same orientation, with similar spacing pointing toward either instinctive or learned behavior. And like modern sea turtles or salmon, these animals may have used sensory cues, perhaps magnetic fields, environmental smells, or even landmarks, to return to the same places over and over. And these migrations wouldn't have been solitary. Many Jurassic dinosaurs likely moved in herds, or at least family groups, with juveniles protected by adults. Fossil beds containing individuals of various ages support the idea of age-segregated group dynamics, younger animals moving together, possibly learning from older individuals. Even in the oceans, migration may have been the norm. Large marine reptiles like plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs may have traveled between feeding and breeding areas, just like today's whales. Their large body size, warm-blooded physiology, suggested by bone growth rings and isotopic analysis, and active swimming behavior all support long-distance capabilities. Let's end this segment with one of the most mind-bending facts of all. The Jurassic, for all its size and spectacle, represents just one chapter in Earth's 4.5 billion-year history. Yet within its 50+ million years, we see the blueprint of life as we know it. The roots of flight, the beginnings of warm-blooded reptiles and birds, the early evolution of mammals, the shaping of modern continents, the formation of coal beds and chalk cliffs, the insects, the plants, the fish, the trees, the social behaviors, migration, parental care, even the earliest signs of colors in feathers and skin, all of it happening beneath ancient skies, beside volcanic coastlines, within coral-fringed oceans, under the shadow of giants. The Jurassic is just an age of dinosaurs. It was an age of everything. As we approach the later chapters of the Jurassic, the story only deepens. While the earliest parts of the period were about recovery and establishment, rising from the ashes of the Triassic extinction, the later Jurassic was a time of bold stability. Life was no longer scrambling for dominance. It had found balance. Yet within that balance, evolution never stopped. It pushed further. It refined. And sometimes it took detours, crafting life forms that boggle the mind, blur classification, and challenge our understanding of what's possible in nature. One group that underwent profound diversification during this time was the stegosaurs. Known for their distinctive dorsal plates and tail spikes, stegosaurs are often depicted as sluggish, dim-witted tanks. But recent findings suggest a much more complex picture. For example, Kentrosaurus, a stegosaur from what is now Tanzania, was smaller and more agile than Stegosaurus. It had shoulder spikes in addition to tail spikes, possibly for defense or display. The variety in plate and spike arrangement across different species implies regional evolution, and perhaps even that these structures were under sexual or social selection, similar to the antlers of deer or the crests of cassowaries today. What's more, brain endocasts, models of the inner skull cavity, show that stegosaurs had enlarged olfactory bulbs, indicating a decent sense of smell. Their brain was small relative to body size, yes, but not rudimentary. It was well developed in areas necessary for survival, processing smells, coordinating body movements, and maintaining social awareness. This raises an interesting point about dinosaur intelligence. While they varied widely, many were far more behaviorally sophisticated than older portrayals suggest. Certain theropods had large forward-facing eyes, supporting depth perception and suggesting complex hunting strategies. Others had elongated arms and claws used not just for killing, but for climbing, foraging, or even manipulating prey. Among the most unusual was the early alvarezsaurids, tiny, feathered theropods with a single enlarged claw on each hand. For years their function was debated. Were they used for defense, grasping prey? Recent theories point toward insectivory, digging into termite mounds or beetle nests in a manner similar to modern anteaters. If true, these dinosaurs weren't chasing down prey, but breaking into it, using brute force in miniature. And that claw wasn't just for show. The muscle attachments in the fossil bones suggest incredible strength relative to body size. Imagine an animal the size of a turkey, capable of tearing into bark or hardened soil, focused not on combat, but on accessing a hidden food supply. It's a behavior we now know is millions of years older than we once thought. The Jurassic was also home to ornithopods, a group of bipedal herbivores that would later give rise to the duck-billed dinosaurs of the Cretaceous. During the Jurassic, species like Camptosaurus and Dryosaurus walked the plains of North America and Europe, using their beaks and battery-like cheek teeth to chew coarse vegetation, an ability that many other dinosaurs lacked. These dinosaurs show evidence of rapid growth rates, suggesting they reached maturity quickly, possibly as a defense against predation. Their strong hind limbs allowed for bursts of speed, and they likely lived in herds or family groups, judging by the fossil records clustering of individuals in various age ranges. It's not hard to imagine a group of Dryosaurus moving across an open Jurassic plain, adults keeping to the outside, juveniles in the center, constantly scanning for movement in the nearby woods. Maybe the group paused to feed, chirping softly, tails flicking in communication, until a distant movement sends them bounding forward again, leaping over roots and stream beds. This isn't speculation. It's reconstruction from data, from footprints, from track spacing, from limb proportions and joint articulation. Paleontology, at its best, is storytelling built on evidence. Now let's look at aquatic ecosystems again. We've discussed the pliosaurs, the ichthyosaurs, and the earliest marine turtles, but one group still deserves more attention: the ammonites. These coiled cephalopods weren't just survivors, they were ecological pillars. Ammonites evolved a wide variety of shell shapes, from tightly coiled spirals to loosely wound forms and even bizarre spike-studded varieties. These differences weren't random, they reflected ecological specialization. Some ammonites were slow-moving floaters, using their shells as buoyant chambers. Others were fast, jet-propelled hunters. Some show signs of sexual dimorphism, where males and females had different shell forms. Others seem to have formed mass aggregations, like modern squid, possibly for mating or migration. Ammonite fossils are often found in such great numbers that entire cliff faces and mountain ranges are composed of their remains. And due to their rapid evolutionary turnover and global distribution, they serve as index fossils, allowing geologists to date rock layers with surprising precision. But ammonites weren't invincible. Their shells show evidence of predation, from punctures by plesiosaur teeth to clean-bore holes likely caused by shelled cephalopods or crustaceans. Their life was a balance, protected by their shells but constantly at risk. Their numbers reflect both success and sacrifice. In a similar vein, we see signs of parasitism and disease in the fossil record, often overlooked but critical parts of Jurassic life. In fossil fish, we find lesions, deformities, and bone overgrowths caused by infections. In some marine reptiles, bones show signs of arthritis, cancer, or healed fractures that tell stories of survival and long lives. Even in fossilized amber, rare for the Jurassic, but present in some parts of the world, we find mites, flies, and other parasites trapped alongside their hosts. A single drop of tree resin becomes a window into an interaction. A fly mid-bite, a tick crawling toward an unsuspecting lizard, a spider lunging at a struggling beetle. It's a reminder that complex ecological relationships, Not just predation but mutualism, parasitism and symbiosis were already fully developed. The web of life was just as tangled then as it is today. And the Earth beneath all of this? It wasn't standing still. Tectonic activity continued reshaping continents, altering coastlines, forming new mountain ranges and sediment basins. As Pangaea split further apart, shallow inland seas formed across what are now parts of Europe, North Africa, and North America. These epicontinental seas were warm, nutrient-rich, and teeming with life. The sediment deposited here became limestone, chalk, and shale, rock formations that now preserve some of the most detailed fossils in the world. In these waters, bivalves thrived, scallops, oysters, and rudists that built reefs alongside sponges and corals. Crinoids waved in the currents, gastropods grazed on algae, and every inch of seafloor teemed with burrowers, crawlers, and filter feeders. Even the microbial life, cyanobacteria and plankton, left their mark. Their build-up contributed to stromatolites in some regions, layered structures made from microbial mats, trapping sediment. Stromatolites are some of the oldest life forms on Earth, but in the Jurassic, they still found places to grow, often in shallow marine lagoons free from heavy grazing. It's hard to overstate just how vibrant the Jurassic oceans were. They weren't just populated, they were buzzing in the silent, pulsing rhythm of life that never stops. The air, too, held its share of surprises. By this stage, oxygen levels were climbing, possibly higher than today's atmosphere, that supported massive insects, high-altitude flyers, and large-bodied terrestrial animals that needed efficient respiration systems. Combined with a warm greenhouse climate and minimal seasonal variation in tropical zones, the Earth was a productivity powerhouse. From that productivity came stability, and from that stability came diversity. Innovation, feathers, powered flight, parental care, group hunting, complex vocalizations, gliding mammals, semi-aquatic reptiles, bone-crushing teeth, tree-climbing claws, beaks, herbivory, omnivory, filter feeding, soaring, burrowing, stalking, grazing, and scavenging. The Jurassic didn't just produce forms, it produced functions, and many of those functions are still with us. When a bird sings on your windowsill, when a fish breaks the surface of a river, when a mammal darts through the undergrowth, those are echoes. Echoes of a world 150 million years old. By the time the Jurassic period was nearing its final stretch, Earth had become a world teeming with life in every form and function imaginable. It was no longer a time of rebuilding after extinction. It was a golden age of ecological richness, in the air, in the seas, across vast plains, and through dense forests. Nature had established itself in dazzling complexity. But while the surface was flourishing, deep within the Earth, tectonic forces continued to shift the planet's shape, quietly setting the stage for the Cretaceous period to come. Massive fault systems formed new ocean basins. Continental rifts widened. The once unified supercontinent Pangaea had now broken into Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. Between them, new oceans were emerging, such as the early Atlantic. This had profound effects on global climate and sea levels. Epicontinental seas, those shallow marine environments that flooded the edges of continents, became vast, warm basins filled with sediment and life. These environments served as nurseries for marine reptiles, fish, and invertebrates. Fossils from these areas show not just bones but entire food chains preserved in layered strata, ammonites, fish, bivalves, sharks, and the occasional skeleton of a drowned dinosaur swept out to sea. Among these marine animals were some of the earliest sharks with modern traits. Though sharks had existed for hundreds of millions of years, the Jurassic saw their further refinement. Species with serrated teeth, adapted for slicing rather than grasping, began to appear, a sign of evolving feeding strategies. Their fossil teeth are found across the world, tiny but durable time capsules of ancient seas. Some Jurassic sharks, like Synecodus, had heterodont teeth, meaning teeth of different shapes in different parts of the jaw. This adaptation allowed them to crush hard-shelled prey while still capturing soft-bodied fish, making them versatile feeders in an increasingly competitive ecosystem. And while we often associate the oceans with giants like plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs, it's these small, adaptable hunters that often played the most important roles. Their ability to exploit a wide range of niches meant that they could survive the constant environmental changes, a survival strategy that continues in modern sharks to this day. On land, the climate was still warm and humid in many parts of the world. Forests of towering conifers dominated higher elevations, while ferns, cycads and ginkgos covered the floodplains and lowlands. Some regions experienced seasonal rainfall, leading to periods of abundance followed by drought, cycles that shaped the behavior and movement of dinosaurs. This brings us to one of the more surprising behavioral revelations of the Jurassic, the possibility of dinosaur migration and seasonal nesting. Trackway evidence suggests that some sauropods traveled in groups across vast distances. Their footprints show a remarkable consistency in spacing and direction, implying coordinated movement, perhaps following river systems, avoiding drought, or reaching established nesting grounds. These were not aimless wanderers. They were animals with memory, instinct, or both. Returning to familiar places year after year, nesting sites themselves offer clues. In parts of Argentina and North Africa, paleontologists have uncovered clusters of dinosaur eggs, sometimes dozens in a single site, with multiple layers indicating repeated use over generations. Eggshell fragments suggest that some species buried their eggs, while others may have left them in open nests, perhaps even tending them. The idea that some dinosaurs practiced parental care has gained support, particularly with the discovery of adults fossilized atop or near nests. This kind of behavior, protecting eggs, regulating their temperature, and defending against predators, draws a direct behavioral line to birds. Speaking of birds, avian evolution was accelerating during the late Jurassic. While Archaeopteryx remains the poster child of early bird evolution, more recent fossil finds from China and Mongolia have painted a broader, richer picture. Species like Orornis, Anchiornis and Jautingia show that feathered, flight-capable creatures were more diverse and widespread than once thought. These early birds, and bird-like dinosaurs, had a mixture of traits. They had flight feathers on both arms and legs. Their tails were long and bony. Their claws remained prominent. They weren't quite modern birds, not yet. But they were well on the way, and their feathers weren't limited to flight. Color studies on preserved melanosomes, pigment-carrying structures, show patterns of striping, speckling, and iridescence. These weren't dull creatures. Some of them were likely as visually vibrant as modern tropical birds, and possibly just as communicative through color displays. Their flight, too, wasn't a single leap of evolution. It was likely a patchwork of gliding, flapping, and powered bursts, adapted for forested environments. Their bones show strong pectoral muscles and advanced shoulder girdles, suggesting that, even if flight was limited, it was purposeful and well-controlled. In the same forests, insects were undergoing major changes. Jurassic beetles began to specialize, some into wood borers, others into pollinators or detritivores. While flowers wouldn't appear until the Cretaceous, gymnosperms like cycads and ginkgos were already beginning to interact with insects in surprising ways. Fossils from this time show beetles with specialized mouthparts and pollen grains stuck to their legs. It's not pollination as we know it today, but it's a step toward it. These insects may have been drawn to nutrient-rich reproductive structures, moving pollen accidentally as they fed. And in the forest floor below, early mammals were quietly evolving. Though they remain small, mouse-sized in most cases, they were no longer just generic insectivores. Some climbed. Others burrowed. A few glided. And at least one had already taken to water. Castorocauda, a semi-aquatic mammal from the middle to late Jurassic, had webbed feet and a paddle-shaped tail. Its teeth were adapted for catching fish. Its fur, preserved in exquisite detail, tells us that insulation and thermoregulation were already essential mammalian traits. In just a few inches of body length, Castorocauda tells a story of an evolutionary lineage preparing for greatness. Mammals, though marginalized during the Mesozoic, were experimenting with the same breadth of ecological roles as their dinosaurian counterparts. Even more bizarre were the docodonts and multituberculates, groups with unique dental patterns, chewing abilities, and niche specializations. They may not have looked like the mammals we know today, but they were building toward them. Meanwhile, back in the seas, plesiosaurs were approaching their evolutionary peak. Massive creatures like Plesiosaurus funke, discovered in Svalbard, may have reached lengths of over 10 meters, with skulls over 2 meters long. Their teeth, thick and conical, suggest a diet of large prey, perhaps other marine reptiles. Fossil finds include evidence of combat, with plesiosaur bones showing punctures from similar-sized jaws. This hints at competition between individuals, territorial fights, perhaps, or mating disputes. These weren't mindless predators. They were apex animals with behaviors layered as any terrestrial carnivore. They also weren't alone. The open ocean housed long-necked plesiosaurs, agile ichthyosaurs, and increasingly diverse fish populations. Some fish had developed armored scales and powerful jaws, capable of holding their own against marine predators. And all of this, every movement, every adaptation, was influenced by the Earth's climate and geology. Volcanic activity in regions like what is now the North Atlantic released gases into the atmosphere. Weather patterns shifted, inland seas expanded or shrank, faunas migrated with the coastlines. Fossils show species moving into new territories, perhaps chasing better food or avoiding changing habitats. The record is patchy, but trends are clear as environments changed. Life responded. Resilience. That's the word that defines the Jurassic in its final stages. Life wasn't just existing. It was reacting, adjusting, and surviving. It had tools, strategies, instincts. And even as the Cretaceous loomed ahead, with its own challenges and transformations, the living world of the Jurassic had set the tone. It had demonstrated what life could be: diverse, adaptive, interconnected, persistent. And even as many of its species would eventually vanish, ammonites, stegosaurs, ichthyosaurs, and more, their impact would echo in the forms that followed. The seeds of the modern world were sown in Jurassic soil. As the Jurassic period drew to a close, it was not with a bang, but with a quiet shift. There was no mass extinction at its end, no global catastrophe to reset life on Earth. Instead, the transition from the Jurassic to the Cretaceous was one of gradual change. A shift in climate, a rearranging of continents, a slow but steady turnover in the plants and animals that had ruled for tens of millions of years. And yet, this quiet turning of the page marked the end of one of the most spectacular chapters in Earth's history. The Jurassic was not just an age of dinosaurs, it was an age of ecosystems. The land, once bare and desolate after the mass extinctions of the Triassic, had blossomed into dense forests, sprawling floodplains, and fern-covered valleys. These habitats supported creatures of every scale, from the tiniest beetles to the largest land animals ever to walk the planet. By the end of the Jurassic, sauropods like Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, and Brachiosaurus had spread across much of the globe. Their long necks reached into the canopy, stripping conifers of their needles, while others swept side to side across lower vegetation. Their presence shaped entire landscapes, influencing plant distribution and even soil composition. Alongside them were the theriophorans, armored dinosaurs like Stegosaurus and Kentrosaurus. Their bony plates and spikes were more than protection. They were displays, adaptations for thermoregulation, or both. And among them, smaller ornithopods darted and grazed, early relatives of the duck-billed dinosaurs that would rise in the next period. The skies were filled with movement. Pterosaurs, once small, simple flyers, had diversified into a dazzling array of forms. Some had crests. Others had wingspans approaching those of small airplanes. And increasingly, they shared the air with early birds, feathered, flight-capable animals with sharp eyes, beaked mouths, and clawed wings. Birds like Archaeopteryx, Anchiornis, and Orornis were still close to their dinosaurian roots, with teeth and long bony tails. But they were already testing the skies in ways that would change the course of evolution forever. The oceans, too, were full of giants and marvels. Plesiosaurs ruled the open seas with their massive jaws and muscular bodies. Ichthyosaurs, once dominant, had begun to decline, replaced by newer marine reptiles and increasingly complex fish species. Ammonites and belemnites still swirled in the currents, forming the backbone of the marine food web. Coral reefs and sponge mounds provided havens for crustaceans and mollusks, while predators stalked through the shoals. Sharks with new tooth arrangements hunted in deeper water, while early rays glided across the sea floor. Life was not just surviving, it was flourishing. But the end of the Jurassic also meant the beginning of a new phase. As continents continued to shift, the climate began to change. In many regions, the lush, humid environments of the Jurassic gave way to more varied climates, some wetter, some drier. Sea levels fluctuated. Volcanic activity increased in parts of the world, leading to the formation of new mountain ranges and islands. These geological changes influenced ecosystems. Certain dinosaur groups began to decline, unable to adapt to the evolving environment. Others began to rise, most notably the coelurosaurs, a group of small theropods that included early birds and would one day give rise to Tyrannosaurus rex and modern avian species. Plant life began to shift, too. While gymnosperms like conifers and cycads still dominated, the very first flowering plants were beginning to appear, tiny, unassuming, and not yet dominant, but destined to change terrestrial life forever. These early angiosperms would eventually revolutionize pollination, herbivory, and even climate, ushering in new relationships between insects, birds, and mammals. Yet, in the final moments of the Jurassic, those changes were only whispers. The world was still ruled by ferns and conifers, by long-necked giants and gliding pterosaurs, by deep-diving reptiles and coiling ammonites. And the fossil record shows something remarkable about this time. It was incredibly stable. For millions of years, the same families of dinosaurs, marine reptiles, and plants thrived across multiple continents. They were not static. They evolved and changed, but the structure of ecosystems remained consistent. Predator and prey, flayer and forager, swimmer and scavenger, all in balance. That balance is one of the most stunning achievements of the Jurassic period. It wasn't just about dominance. It was about complexity. interdependence, evolution responding to opportunity and also to challenge. When a plant evolved a tougher leaf, a dinosaur evolved better teeth. When a fish swam faster, its predator evolved sharper vision. When an insect began visiting cones for food, the plant began to change in response. And so on, layer upon layer, life shaping life. Even now, the footprints of the Jurassic are still with us. They're embedded in the rocks of Western North America, where you can walk beside the very steps of a diplodocus. They're pressed into the cliff faces of Portugal and Morocco, where theropods once chased prey across coastal dunes. They're found in shale and limestone, coiled in ammonite shells, etched in fern fronds, visible in the soft outline of a feather. And they sit found more subtly in modern life, in bird song, in flowering plants, in the curvature of a dolphin sip's spine, in the migration of turtles, in the symmetry of a dragonfly sip's wing, in the patience of a crocodile, in the climb of a squirrel, in the shape of your own jaw. Because the Jurassic didn't end. Not completely, it transformed. Its legacy continued. So when you look at the night sky and hear the faint flutter of wings above, or walk through a pine forest and smell the resin, or see a seabird dive into a wave, you stare watching the Jurassic, still unfolding. A whisper, not of extinction, but of endurance. Because deep time is not a story of loss. It steps a story of survival, and the Jurassic is one of its finest chapters.